Hey everyone, welcome to the Higher Alignment Podcast. I'm your host, Minh-Thu and I'm an executive coach focused on helping people heal their burnout and reconnect to their purpose through self-mastery. I show executives and high performers how to identify their blind spots and use this to propel them on their journey to finding more fulfillment and freedom without burning out. If you've been feeling lost and disconnected in life, book a complimentary connection call to discuss how we can get you back on the path of self-mastery and living a life that feels successful on your terms. Go to higheralignmentconsulting.com/program to book your call, and we'll see you on the other side. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Higher Alignment Podcast. And I'm really excited because I have a new friend and a new guest on today, Mr. Billy Zorrillo. And Billy and I actually met on LinkedIn, which I know a few of my guests have been the case now, but that's the beauty of the internet. You cross paths with people you might not usually cross paths with. And what I love about Billy and his work, what attracted me to it, is he's actually a financial advisor and coach. However, Billy's approach to, which we'll get into it, to finances and money and wealth goes back to the root cause. And anyone who's been consuming my content or listening to me for a while, I always say I'm a root cause girly. And whether it's burnout or relationships or money, like it all stems back to the same place. So I'm really excited to dive into this with you today, Billy. How are you?
Wonderful. It's a beautiful Monday, right? And so it's a great start to a new week. And I mean, it's like I guess it's the first Monday of the month, right? And
Right?
so we're in May, so we're spring is here.
Yeah, I don't know how you feel, but I'm glad I don't have a case of the Mondays like I used to. Like I remember when I used to wake up when I worked in the auto industry and Monday was like, "Oh god," like you almost like don't want to go to bed so that it doesn't have to come the next day, but I like Mondays now, so hopefully you do too.
Yes, yes. The Sunday scaries
Yeah,
that led into the Monday, dreadful Mondays. And so
yeah.
yeah, I have that same story. And so I definitely sure we'll get into it. But yeah. I definitely enjoyed Mondays a lot better than I used to.
Well, yeah, let's start there. Let's get into your story a little bit and maybe, how you got into the financial investment space and then also what it was in your experiences that led you to talk about money and wealth in the way that you do now.
Yeah, so that's I love sharing my story. And I love hearing other people's stories because it tells us so much about who they are and where they came from. And so I grew up in a different industry. I feel like a lot of us start off in an industry. We're 18, we're 19, right? We know what we're going to do with the rest of our lives, right? For the next 40 to 50 years of our life, we have it all figured out at 18, right? We know exactly what we're doing. That's not the case, right? And so, I grew up in the hospitality world. I grew up in hotels, big, the big brands and stuff like that. And I always loved people. I loved, hearing people's stories, like I just mentioned. But I got to the ripe age of 30 and was like, all right, am I going to be able to do this it's kind of like almost a burnout situation. It's like, am I going to be able to do this for the next 40 years of my life? And the answer became quickly no. And I was lucky enough to kind of stumble into financial advising. I was kind of in a weird world where I was just like, I didn't know where I wanted to do with my life, so I was just grabbing at anything, right? And so I'll never forget it. Me and my wife were, hey, we're 30, 31. We need to do the adult thing and actually have a money talk, right? And so we sat down with an advisor, and as we're walking out of, his office, my wife kind of looked at me and she said, you'd be really good at that. And I said, what do you mean? And I was like, I'm terrible with finances, right? Like I didn't learn about this stuff. Like he's teaching us. And she said, that's exactly it. She said, what you can't teach is how you connect with people. What you can teach is finance. You can learn about money. That's a learnable skill. And so that was 5.5 years ago. And so,
Shout out your
yes,
wife.
yes, shout out my wife. She saw the
Saw
potential
the
even
vision.
when I didn't. But that's why I love her, right? That she sees things that I don't see, and I see things that she doesn't see. And so but yeah, so got licensed, the whole 9 yards. And just like every financial advisor, probably some financial advisors are going to be listening to this, we're going to help whoever needed help, right? Like we don't have a target market. We're just like we just want to help people, right? And but it wasn't, to answer your question, like what I do differently now compared to when I was first in the industry is I read a book. It always starts with like you read a book, right? And I read a book called The Psychology of Money, and it fundamentally changed the way I wanted to advise people. It fundamentally changed the way I thought about money, and not only just from a client perspective, but from my own perspective, right? And uncovering the root cause behind why, because you look at money and you're like, that I know I need to save more. That's a logical thought. I know I need to spend less. That's a logical thought. But we don't operate in logic, right? When it
Right.
comes to our money, we operate in emotions, emotional based decision making process. And those are often tied to deep rooted stories that we grew up with, right? That we learn from our parents, from our society, and all those types of things. And so when I started to realize my own limitations, my own story that was holding me back from having money conversations with my wife, being able to not feel anxiety around money or about spending money, right? I would feel anxiety, so much anxiety if we spent $100. So we'd be at the grocery. Even though we had money, yep, we had money in the bank. We weren't living paycheck to paycheck, right? All those things that you think are going to happen wasn't the case numbers wise, but feelings wise, I felt full panic mode. And so uncovering those money stories, the root cause, that led me to want to do that for my own clients. And so that's kind of how I got into the industry, and then why and how I made that shift into thinking and wanting to be an advisor that talks about the behavioral side and the technical side, but the behavioral side first.
Yeah, that's so great. I'm glad you pointed out that logic versus emotion because it is true. You know what I mean? And obviously, so I work with my clients mainly from a burnout standpoint. Um, but my clients are typically entrepreneurs, executives, high performers, and let's just say we're all money driven as far as in that space. I guess I can't say all of us, but that's a heavy reason why you typically become a high performer. Well, at least you think it's because of the money. It's usually, again, root cause that goes underneath that. But, I'm constantly having conversations around what is your relationship with money, right? Because I have seen, and even going back to my previous job, I was working in a finance department. So I was seeing people's credit, I was seeing people's income, and that's the first place I noticed. Like I would see people making $500,000 a year maxed on everything. And then I saw people making $1 million a year really cheap. Didn't like, just same thing as you're saying, had money in the bank, wasn't overextended, and still just spending even a few $1,000s was like, oh no, they just didn't know if they could do that. You know what I mean? And that was the first place I started to kind of like process. It's like, oh, it's not even about the money itself. It's about your relationship with it. So maybe let's start there. Like, what is when you're getting to uncovering that stuff, because I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, the reason you get to the root cause of someone's relationship with money is to help free them in some capacity so they don't feel so stressed
Yep.
out about it and be able to enjoy their lives and be able to see reality for what it is beyond the emotion. But like, so what's your first step in like helping someone or getting kind of a snapshot for where someone is at with that and what their relationship is like with money?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, the first step that we often take is in our planning process is hearing their money story. So asking them questions about where they came from, what type of, what was their earliest memory with money, what was, you know, what were the money conversations like in their household, because that's going to be a telltale sign of how they operate with their money today. I'll give you an example. My parents argued about money a lot. I mean, I don't remember them doing anything else but arguing about money. I grew up with a very negative feeling around money, right? That's where that anxiety came from. And but my wife, complete opposite. Mom and dad together 35 plus years. They both had good government jobs. made really good decisions with their money. So when it came to spending money with her, it just became there was no hang up, there was no issue about it, right? Or talking around money, right? Like just having random conversations, where having a random conversation around money for me would just send me into full panic mode. And then you get into a fight, like, oh, I don't want to talk about this. Like, are you judging me? Are you saying I'm doing something wrong? And the other person's like, what are you talking about? We're just talking about it's just money, right? And two people with two different backgrounds, you know, they have two different reactions to money. And so that tells me a lot about where people are, like you said, they could be making a couple $100,000 a year and they feel self-conscious about their money, but on the outside they look like they have it all together. They have the high paying job, they have the car, they have the house, they have the family, but deep down inside they're in full panic mode because of the old patterns, the old stories that keep on repeat. And so they will always be where they're at because they haven't gotten past that hurdle, whatever that hurdle might be. And so that's where we normally start with people, is just to say, like, what do we, people often want to think about when they sit down with a financial advisor or a coach or something like that, thinking about the future, right? 30 years from now, 15 years from now, what are we going to be doing? How are we going to invest our money? But the there's so much work that has to be done on the front end because you lived a full life already. You've experienced so much stuff. You've experienced trauma and all those different things. And all those things play a major role in how you make money decisions every day.
Yeah, that's so yeah, that's so clutch what you just said there. And so like so going back to kind of what I said about I made the comment earlier about like, high performers, executives, entrepreneurs. Obviously, those are people who are typically hustle, 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 want to make things happen. Money is, a motivator in there as well, too. Might not be all of it. But I actually was listening to a podcast earlier today on the Modern Wisdom podcast with Chris
Mm,
Williamson. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but he referenced this quote he made in the past. And he said, super successful people often should be pitied, not envied.
mm,
And what he said around that is he's like, if you look at like a Jeff Bezos or someone who's made like uber wealth, he's like, most people do not want to be in their headspace. Most people don't want to go through their emotions and the problems they have to deal with in a day. And he goes, you have to ask yourself, what type of childhood or experiences has that person went through to feel like they need to prove themselves to that extent, you know?
yep.
And so maybe we're not talking about Jeff Bezos, that's not as relatable, but let's talk about the executive who is making a few $100,000 a year, but they still feel like it's not enough, or they're still behind. Like, what is that to you? Like if I gave you that prototype, they're making, let's say, $250,000 a year. They have quote unquote security in their job. They've been there for a while. They're good at their job. They've proven themselves, but they still feel like they could potentially fall behind, or it's not enough, and like maybe really tight with their money or trying to push it away. Like, what does that say to you, or what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear that character type?
Yeah. And it's a character type I run into a lot. And the one thing that I notice, right, I try to look for patterns, right, when I'm talking to people. And there's certain money patterns that I've noticed, right, with certain people, certain demographics and stuff like that and so forth. And the one thing that I notice with like high performing, high income earning people is that they have been, a lot of times they're trying to achieve an external type of validation. And what I have found is that, and I'm sure you find this at the same time, is that when we search for that external validation, it will never be enough, right? Because even when you get that award or you get that promotion or you get that raise, you're always going to be wanting more. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to want more, but when it becomes part of you, when it becomes your personality, when it becomes how you define yourself, it will never be enough. Like, you look at some of the most famous people in the world. The one example that always comes to my head for some reason, and I don't know why, because there's a ton of them. But like I think about like Kate Spade, for instance, right? Kate Spade had it all. Had the brand, had anything that she ever could want. She had, right? She could snap her fingers and have it, but it wasn't enough, right? And she ended up tragically, taking her own life. But that just proves to you that like we're chasing these external things, validation, and the one question I always ask them is, well, what does wealth mean to you? And they give me some answer like, well, I can buy this, I can buy that. And I'm like, that's surface level, right? What happens when you buy all those vehicles? Then what? What happens after that? Well, I don't know. Well, it's because we never taken the time to clearly define what's important to us, what wealth means to us, what we want our wealth to do for us. And when we start to ask those questions, we can then begin to hone in their vision, and then they can chase their vision. And that is a much more worthwhile goal to chase after than just the next raise or the next promotion or the next, like, because there's people on social media that I hear be like, oh, I'm chasing $1 billion. Do you understand how much money $1 billion is? It's a lot of money. Like, there's not a difference. Your life is not going to get significantly better, making from 400,000 to 500,000 or from 900,000 to a million. It's just not, your life's not going to get that much drastically bigger or better, bigger. Like, there's only so much things that you can buy that eventually that's going to fizzle out. You're going to burn out, right? In this case. And you're going to be like, why am I doing all this stuff? It's because we've never clearly defined what's important to that person. And we never take the time to do that. And then that's why we have burnout when it comes to, you know, your career and making money, your relationships, all that leads into other parts of your life.
All right, if you're a burnt out executive or high performer, chances are you're on a 3 to 4 month cycle of burnout, meaning the first few months you're high energy, productive, and making it happen. And then once that third or fourth month sets in, you're exhausted, irritable, snappy, and ready to give it all up. Now, there are two main reasons you get stuck in this cycle that no one talks about when it comes to stress management information out there. So I've put this together in a short video called The Real Reason You're Burnt Out. I put it in the show note links, so take 12 minutes to watch this video and let this be the first step to you getting off this hamster wheel of burnout. All right, guys, back to the episode. 100%. I'm so glad you touched on that because it's true. Like with the talk of like making $1 billion, for instance. Maybe we'll lower that because it seems probably unrealistic for
Yeah.
most people. But let's say even making $1 million. You know, when I'm talking about people with whatever their goals are, I always bring it back to like, I'll list out a bunch of material goals with them. So I break it down in 8 different categories. And so finances, physical health, emotional well-being, blah, 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 blah. And then they kind of list, well, what's your goal? And I just let them go off the top. What's the first thing that comes to mind? And then once we list out all the usually more external metrics
Yeah.
of it, I go, okay, so now if you achieve that, how would it make you feel?
Mm.
And I think it goes back to the same thing with making $1 million. Like most people think that, okay, well, if I made $1 million, that means I would feel X, right? I would not have the pressure every month of taking care of everybody. Like I'd be able to pay my bills clearly. I'd be able to like not have to work so hard, right? And still be able to live out my life and enjoy soccer practice with the kids and be more present with my family and like all these things they think would give them that. And then go, okay, so like we need to go after that. We need to go after that feeling because you actually don't know if that $1 million is going to bring you that relief that you're after. Like you actually have no idea. You hope it's going to, and that's why you make it your metric. But to your point, people have made hundreds of millions of dollars and end up being some of the most unhappy people on the planet. But I think it goes back to what you said of like, do you know yourself? Do you actually know what's important to you? And are you building, your success blueprint around all of that?
Mm. Yeah. I love that. And it's so true. It's just, yeah, it like you said, it all comes back to the most important question, what's important to us? That's often where I lead from. It's a question I ask myself, every day almost. It's like, what's important to me? And I think people need to realize too, like that's going to change over time as well. Like what was important to you in your 20s and 30s may not be important to you in your 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so it's like that's always going to be evolving too. And so just because you have it figured out today, like, hey, I know I'm chasing, like you said, like chasing the feeling rather than chasing the metric. It's like, okay, well, I want $1 million so that I can spend more time with my kids at their soccer practice. You're not chasing $1 million, you're chasing that time freedom, right? Does that really quantify to $1 million? And like you said, like just because you have $1 million doesn't mean those problems go away. Sometimes the more money you make, the more problems you have, right? The more responsibility you have. And people don't realize that it's like you're running a business, you're a CEO, you're an executive. Like the higher you climb on the food chain, the more and more time that you're giving up to get that money, right? And so it's like then you got to figure out like how do I separate myself from making that money, right? Like what is the actual feeling that I'm chasing? And then we make goals around that. It might not even be what you originally thought would be the goal. Might be a more attainable goal at that point.
And so what is that process for you? As much as you can give us as far as like so when you see someone again in that state where they're chasing and they think it's a dollar amount and you're telling them like, "Hey, what you're actually telling me is that being more present with your kids is more important and spending, you know, you know, spending more time at home and like being present with your wife or your friends or whoever, like just being more present in your life. You're telling me that's what you want, but your actions aren't actually aligning to that, right? Because I talk about the nervous system a lot. And so if I was to use this example, it's one thing to consciously know, hey, I do want to stop working at 5 p.m. so I can go be present with my family for the night. I do. But my body goes through a very visceral anxious reaction when I shut my computer at 5 p.m. and then I open it up again at 8 o'clock. Like I want to, but I'm having a hard time like actually putting it into motion. Like how do you work with someone through that?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that we do in our process is, you know, because we're talking to them about those things that you just mentioned, right? And we're starting to uncover and see that disconnect. And it comes down to a lot of programming, right? A lot of the way that that brain is wired. And so we need to start figuring out ways to rewire that. And one of the key things that we do that's helped a lot of our clients is is what we call the financial statement of purpose. And it's a purpose statement that we help them, we use their words to define this statement. And there's no real formula to the statement. It's really got to be based off what's important to them and their words. And we help them set goals around that specific statement so that they can begin to rewire their brain. We're talking about their statement when we're talking to them. It's not like, hey, your investment accounts did X, or your money did this today, or which is all important, don't get me wrong, but it's having conversations in a different way about your money and setting those conversations up with them and showing them how to have those conversations with themselves and letting them know, like, just because you have awareness doesn't mean automatically tomorrow your mindset shifts and you're like, oh, I'm a new person, I'm fully aware, I'm good, right? Like I don't have to do anything. No, it took, if however long they've been alive to program their brain that way. It's going to take some time to reprogram that their brain. So it's maybe taking little steps. Maybe it's, instead of shutting the computer down we want to shut down at 5, but maybe we usually work until 8. Maybe we shut it down at 6. Maybe we set some smaller parameter goal where they're weaning off of it, right? That's why I hate budgets. That's why I hate restrictive things like that, is because you go from 0 to 100. It's nearly impossible to make that habit stick. But I can go from maybe 0 to 10 miles an hour. Then all of a sudden, maybe we increase it to 15 miles an hour, right? And now we're working our way towards that. And it's a progress rather than like, hey, if you don't do it tomorrow, it's not going to work, right? They're gonna check out, right? And so it's that ongoing conversations, that ongoing coaching that's really important around their goals. It's not just like, hey, here's your goals, go do it, good luck, hopefully it works out. It's no, it's rewiring that communication, that personal inner communication with yourself.
Yeah, yeah, love what you just said. It does come down to that inner communication and the relationship you have with you, right? And I think that's where so many of us, myself included, have gotten caught up is we're constantly with money, with career, with whatever the case is, as far as like validation, it's always about the relationship we have with the external world. And we haven't spent enough time reflecting on what that relationship is with ourselves, and until you take time to do that, you end up on that hamster wheel that you mentioned earlier of like external validation will never be enough. No matter what you think it is, it will never be enough because ultimately it's out of our control, right? Like anything external of us can be taken from us at any time.
Yep.
The only thing we actually have control of is what's within us. So it's like if you're going to base your quality of life and your definition of success on
Mm,
anything, like make that bet on something that you actually have control over?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is that's the one thing we need to focus on. Like you said, the things that we can control. What can control? We can control our actions, our attitude, how we show up. Those are the things that, you know, one of my mentors used to say, if you do the right things long enough, you'll be successful, right? And so it's like those little things, those little victories and those little steps over time. I love compound interest. I'm an advisor, right? So it's compound interest, right? Working in your favor, the little steps every day that add up to, all of a sudden you're going to turn around and you'll be like, I'm not the same person I was, a year ago or 2 years ago. And that's where you want to be. And it's going to take a little bit of work, but if you're an executive or an entrepreneur, a business owner, you're not afraid of hard work, right? That's what got you to where you are at. And so this is just going to take a little hard work, right? If you really want it, this is something you really want, you're going to make that effort. So,
Yeah, 100%. Okay, I wanted to ask you some questions based on like some things I've seen with my own clients. So they'll stay anonymous, but but just to kind of get what your perspective on it would be. So I can think of I have a couple clients this applies to, but I'll use one specific situation, but it's the blueprint of the quote unquote challenge is the same. But I have one client who has done extremely well for herself. She's built her own business up. She's only 33, again, has done very, very well for herself. And through this process of her working with me, we've talked about how like some of her clients just aren't in alignment with her anymore.
mm,
Like she's just every day she's like she's just doesn't enjoy the relationship, doesn't enjoy the work anymore. And we've had these talks about like in order for you to attract in the dream clients that you want, we need to make space for them. So, like, sometimes the universe wants you to let go of what's no longer serving you anymore and kind of drop that energy so that you have open palms that you can receive new clients with. But, it's been a challenge for her. And, like, she grew up not well off, like, didn't have any money as a kid, grew up hardcore in scarcity mode. Scarcity mode. Who says it like that? Scarcity mode. Grew up like she's been in fight or flight pretty much all her life, survival. And so now she's at a point where we said earlier she does not need to be in survival anymore. Like logically, she is good and she is in a place where she can make these moves, but it's been a really big block for her. So like how would you talk someone through that, or what would you look at to help someone work through that scenario?
yeah, that is a, uh, if I had a dollar for every time I seen that situation, I'd be pretty well off, right? In that sense. And I see that particular pattern a lot um in what you described, right? Somebody that grew up in a scarcity in a scarce world, right? With limited resources. And the thing is that they never want to go back, right? They never want to have to, well, it's a control thing, right? They want to be in control of their surroundings. They want to be in control of their situation. And when they were younger, they probably didn't feel like they were in control, right? A lot of the things were, they were young, they couldn't control a lot of what was going on around them. And so that's probably a key factor, is that she wants to feel like she wants control. And it's defining, what does that look like? What does control look like to her, right? And what does security look like to her? When we talk about financial security, often we get the generic answers. That might be like, oh, I just want to be able to pay my bills, or something along those lines. But it goes deeper than that, right? It goes way deeper than just being able to pay your bills. Like, yeah, that's great. Everybody wants to pay their bills, um, but it's almost like a sense of like, you don't know what's going to happen. And that goes back to that control. And what we would do in that scenario is to look at, I would try to pair the data along with the emotions, right? And so we would look at the data in the sense of, what does she currently have? What does she currently got going on? How long can she survive off the assets that she does have? And what would it look like to replace, if she were to fire those people, right? And fire those clients, and essentially, so that she can make room for the new clients to come in. What would that loss of revenue actually look like? And could she actually sustain that? Sometimes we don't even quantify what that actually would look like. And then that just builds on that fear, like, oh, I don't know what that's going to look like. Well, let's actually look that up, right? And so I think the big thing is addressing the story, right? And coming up with goals to make her feel secure, right? To have her help her feel that security, so that she can fully be confident in stepping out and saying, "Hey, like, thanks, but you know what, when I was in management, I told people I'd never fire them. I would just release them for other opportunities, right?
Mm,
So releasing somebody for other opportunities. um but yeah, I mean, it's very common to see that. I would let her know that too, but like, this is a common thing. This is not something that's unique, which is good in this sense, because you want precedents, you want to give examples and stuff like that. But um yeah, addressing that control, that fear of control, the fear of the unknown, and then backing that up with data to be like,
mm,
hey, like, you're going to be fine. You're going to make, that's not going to be your story, right? You're in charge of your story. You're in control of it, right? So
mm.
um yeah.
That's great. So it's like using the logical to set the like basis, right? So this is kind of worst case scenario. This is what we're dealing with logically, but then tapping into what you said as far as like just like having that faith, and then also, you know, like you said, you get to choose your story moving forward. Just because the story of the past, whatever your story of the past, does not have to be the story of the future, right? So then pairing that with the belief and the faith in yourself, but again, having that those numbers logically support a foundation of like, okay, we can do this, right?
Yeah, I think another thing you pointed out really interesting, and it's something that I've done with people that have felt that, is just ask them, what is worst case scenario for you? Like,
Right.
let's talk about that. Like,
Right.
they have this thought in their head. Like, we always think something's going to turn out way worse than it actually is, right? We're all guilty of that, right? We're always thinking of the worst case scenario. It's like, all right, let's paint the worst case scenario. What does that look like? And then she paints that picture, and I'm like, well, that's not what's going to happen here, right? Look at all these things that we have that's not going to be the case,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
retelling the story, rewriting the story away from what she believes is going to happen.
Ye
Yeah, it's just and like I said, and setting action steps, setting goals around those things to support her ultimate vision.
yeah, you're right. Sometimes when you see, like, worst case scenario on paper, you're like, "Wow, what lunatic wrote this?" Like, "This isn't gonna happen. This doesn't even make sense." You know what I mean?
Yeah, you have no
Like,
precedence for
don't
what you're saying is going to happen. Like, That has to,
Totally.
you know?
Totally. It's like, Jesus, like, it really where my imagination is terrible. It's in the ditch right now. So, okay, I have a question now on the other side of things. So, I have had a couple clients who make great money, but then seem to feel like they're always overspending, or maybe they don't even define it that way, but like make good money. And then I have one client in particular I can think about. She every time she got a raise, she would be like, why am I still living paycheck to paycheck when I'm making more and more and more? Like she had gotten like two pretty substantial raises in the last year, and she was like, it felt like she was like trying to get rid of it almost. And then I have another client I can think of, same thing, has done really well for himself and his family, and is like, we have so much coming in, but we also have so much going out, and it just and so that's adding extra pressure on him as the main provider, and you know what I mean? And it's just kind of like, okay, so what, there's like, again, there's a wiring going on beneath that. So I don't know if there's two different approaches you'd take to them, or if there's the same type of questions you ask, or what's your read on that?
Yeah, so the first one, right, like I got raises and I'm still living paycheck to paycheck, which is, believe it or not, the stat that I last read that like over 50% of people who make six figures still live paycheck to paycheck. And the simple reason, without knowing all the other external things, right? The first thing I would look at is lifestyle creep, right? We get accustomed to a certain lifestyle, and all of a sudden, when we get a pay raise, we just match our lifestyle to the pay raise. And so it would become a question of, all right, well, why is that happening? Right. It often comes from a lack of awareness, right? Is usually a first thing, a lack of awareness, not only to where our money is going, but a lack of awareness to, and I know I harp on this a lot, but it goes back to a lack of awareness of where we want to go. Like, what do we want to do? Sometimes we can get in autopilot mode and we're just living life, which I love. I love living life. I love living for the moment. I love having experiences, right? But there also has to come with some guardrails, right? And we need to be aware of, like I said, where our money is going, which when that's probably the biggest problem I see in high income earners, is that they get to a level of income where they're like, I'm making good income. They know they're making good income. And so they're like, well, if I'm making good income, I don't need to keep track of it. I don't need to be mindful of it, right? I have plenty of coming in. So, and I have plenty coming in next month. And so they just keep spending and spending and spending without any rhyme or reason. I call it intentional spending, right? When we spend our money intentionally, right? We every dollar that we make has a job, right? We have money that's for fun. We have money for the long term. We have money for, if we need it for an immediate need, or money for investment. So being intentional with our money, when we become intentional with it, for the lack of better term, I often see people not have that problem anymore. They're like, oh, well, I'm more aware of where my money is actually going, and so they don't allow that lifestyle creep. And the same thing for the other scenario is it just comes down to a lack of awareness in where our money is going and why we're spending the money that we are. And it's a like I said, it's a big problem that I see in high income earners, high performers. It's usually that, like, and another thing that could lead to overspending. I see it a lot. I'll give you an example of a client I have. They make really good money, right? They have a nice house. They have all the nice things in the world, but this person's having to work an extra job, even though they already make high income. And it was because when they were growing up, right, we uncovered their story. They were growing up, their parents would, basically, they would buy them a bunch of stuff. They would feel guilty about buying all that stuff, and they take all their toys and they throw them out. It was crazy.
Interesting.
Yeah, crazy story, right? But she always felt like she didn't want her kids to have that life. So she's always trying to, make sure that they have the best life. So she's just spending money like all over the place. And but at the end of the month, she's like struggling, right, to pay bills and stuff like that because she's spent all her money on other things. And it goes back to the story, the lack of awareness to where our money is going, but then also a lack of awareness of where we want to be, right? Where do we want to be in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, 20 years? You can define those couple of things, you're going to have a better opportunity to keep more of your money in the long term.
Okay, so you said obviously awareness, just being again, and I'm guilty for that. I know when I started making, good coin, same thing. I was like, oh, I got a good paycheck coming in every month. What's this purse and these shoes? And it's like, oh my God, I would sit at my desk and just order, order, order. You know what I
It's
mean? So
easy.
yeah, totally. It is easy. And and I would say like I still put away a good amount of money at that time, but I could have put away more if I was really more intentional with that awareness, right? So being aware of where you're spending your money and that awareness going back to like what are we optimizing for? What are the things that are most important in my life, and is the money going into those buckets? And if it's not going into it, then we need to ask some more questions about why that is, right? So that's great from like a practical step. Now, going back to the root cause, so would you say then like finding out their money story, but like would that be a root cause wound of just being like not like there would be a negative story around money in the household? Like that particular like again the overspending, like what's the typical story as a kid that you would see if that's kind of what your behavior is now?
Yeah, I think a typical story is coming from a place of lack, and that they never want to feel like that again, right? And they're going to do whatever in their power, right? And when we're in that survival mode, right? And if we never get out of it, we can never get to the next level. So we're always just constantly burning, right? We're always just constantly working because if I stop working, I'm going to be poor. Like that's the equation that's in the head. Like if I stop working, or if I work, not even if I stop working, if I take my foot off the gas, I'm going to be poor. I'm going to be in the streets. And it's like there's so much that has to happen before that actually does happen. Like going back to the worst case scenario, like that's not like when you write it down on paper, like it sounds really crazy because it is crazy. Um, but it's that it's coming from a place of lack. On the flip side, I have seen a couple instances where a person comes from a place of abundance, right? Their family was well off, they had a lot of things, and they don't value money the same way as the person from lack. Like the person that doesn't have the value because they had it, like they had it everywhere. They're just like, well, money's like I don't need to plan. Like going back to that, like, hey, I'm making good money. I don't need to plan for this. Like I'm always gonna make good money. I'm always gonna have money. And it's like you can burn out that way too, right? You can spend through. I mean, you look at the stats, like you think about like business owners. Like usually, the third generation in business owners, the business is out of business because that person who inherited the business at the third generation doesn't have the same value to the business as the person that started it, right? That brought it up from the ground, that fought, that cried, that bled, that all the sweat, all those things to build that business. And so it's like, yeah, just because you know that's why your story is so important. It's not just the lack, it's also, hey, the overabundant person, the person that had it all, could be in the same boat at the end of the day.
Yeah, you're true. Or you're true. You're right. It could go either way, and I guess that comes back to your point earlier about like acknowledging your money story up to this point, but then redefining what that looks like for you now. Like you ultimately have to be the writer of that story, or at least put pen to paper of what you want that to look like, so that whatever the old programming is won't steer you off the course of what's actually most important to you. It's the same thing of like, you hear two sons are have an alcoholic father, one never drinks alcohol for the rest of his life, and then one becomes another alcoholic. Again, it's like it's your story to define, but you actually have to take the time to sit still and define that. And I think that's something none of us do. Of course, we're not taught that in school. We're taught to line dance or something silly like that. That's what we learned in my school anyways. But like calculus, whatever, trigonometry. I've never used any of those. I guess the engineers wouldn't agree with that. Maybe they do. But like understanding our relationship with money is so important that it's like that's really a talk we should be constantly having, because like you said, it's also going to evolve and change as we get older and we grow, So um I wanted to ask you another question. And one thing I'm constantly talking about with my clients is like defining success in your terms.
Mm,
And it is not realistic, in my opinion, or naive to say money doesn't matter. It absolutely matters, especially with the economy, how how it is right now. I don't know how it is in the US, but in Canada, we've been on a slippery slope. It is not in a good place. Standard of living is super high, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so money is important. You know what I mean? And I think people should enjoy money, and people like money is not the root of all evil. Money is not a negative thing. Like you should want money, you should want to make money, you should have a healthy relationship with it. But when I talk about redefining your definition of success, to me that's like for me personally, just making a lot of money is not enough. I've done that where that's all my focus was, and I burnt out, and I woke up every morning in dread and feeling guilty, like with anxiety every day. I've changed my money story now. Not my money story so much, but my success story. Like
mm.
what does that look like for me now? So like when you're talking with people about that, like how do you encourage them to answer that question, or how do you guide them to answer that question of like what does success mean to you now? And I guess what is money's part in that definition of success?
Yeah, and I love that question, right? I love asking those types of questions, not only to my clients but to myself. And you know, I pair that question that you just asked. What does success mean to you? Because I think in the marketing world does a really good job of telling what success should look like, right? We should have the fancy cars. It should be Instagram, right? That's what success looks like, right? And and I pair that question with two other questions, right? What does wealth mean to you? And what does money mean to you? Because those are two different, in my opinion, they're two different terms, right? Wealth is one thing, money is a different thing. And because money could mean like security, right? Where wealth could mean something beyond ourselves, right? And so with those two answers, I ask the question, like, what does success mean to you? And people, well, it's, I make a lot of money. I'm successful in my career. And I'm like, you know, those are all really great answers, but like, those are just surface level answers, right? Like, just does money, asking the question, like, if they told me, hey, like, money, making a lot of money means success to me. Okay. It's like, well, let's dig deeper into that. What does that actually mean to you to make more money? And so it is important to define what success looks like to you as a person. And yeah, and so it comes down to really those three questions. Those three questions will give me a lot of questions to ask them about what they just told me. um and right, in your coaching sessions, it's that first answer is usually the surface level answer. It's the answer that they feel comfortable giving. And the answer that is real is uncomfortable. And I don't I think people don't realize that. Like, the success question, like, should make you feel a little uncomfortable to say, in my opinion, because that is what because it's almost like I might doubt that level of success, right? Like, oh, making money, anybody can go out there today and make a ton of money, right? That's like, there's ways to go out and make money pretty comfortably, right? But that level of success that is really important to you is uncomfortable, because it's something in the back of your mind that you're like, I'm stepping out, right? I'm stepping I'm taking a step of faith in order to hit this level of success. And so that's where I want to get to, is like, where do you start to feel a little uncomfortable, right? Maybe that's not a level of success that you even shared with your mentors, your family, your friends, your spouse, your kids, right? That's something that you keep deep inside. That's where we want to get to, because when we can touch that level, the other stuff becomes a lot easier to talk about, right? What we're doing with our money. Where do we invest it? How do we spend it? How do we get intentional with it? The goals become a lot easier to define because we've truly defined what success looks like to you.
Oh, I love that so much because you're right. The first answer is always the most polished, right? And the one they've listed off a few times. I myself included, as you're saying
Yeah,
it, I'm thinking
same
about
here.
myself. But that answer that you're like, "Oh, do I even wanna say it out loud?" Like, or I don't need to say it. I know it. I don't need to tell him. Like, that answer that makes you sweat, or better yet, makes you go, "This is silly." Like, you don't say it. And for me, like, I would say I experienced this before, maybe even some of my clients, like, I know for me, saying the money part was never hard. It was like admitting that, like, I wanted, like, a husband in the process, and admitting that, like, I wanted, a person that can meet me on this level and can, that was the vulnerable part for me to say. That's what made me squirm internally and be like, do I even want to admit this? And, I would say I work with men and women, but I think that sometimes that's the hardest thing for them to express. It's like in like my clients, the money part almost isn't too hard. Like it's still a little bit uncomfortable, but admitting like the part that would like gravitate towards their heart and fulfill their heart and their peace of mind, that's what they have a hard time admitting. But you're right. That's when you're really talking about what success truly means to you, is because you're like almost scared to utter the words.
Yeah. Or you're like thinking like, "Oh, if I tell her this, she's going to think I'm stupid or she's going to laugh at this." Like that's the goal I want to hear, because that's what's important to you. Because it's easy to say I want to make $100,000 or $500,000 this year. It's like, okay, but yeah, that everybody wants to do that. But that's not going to get you up every morning, right? What's going to get you up every morning is that deep down, that answer that, like you said, brings a little bit of panic, almost like a little bit of fear. But then you're like, if I tell this person, then I have to do it, right? Like that's what I'm like. Yes, you have to do it. You said it, like Um, but yeah, I mean, because I remember when somebody did that for me, and just how transforming that was, and it became less about like how much money I'm making a month. And it became more about like, how many people did I help this month? Right. I knew if I helped X amount of people, that would translate into a certain amount of revenue, but it didn't become about the revenue anymore. It became about, or the profit, it became about how many people am I going to impact? How many people am I going to, help them get what they want? And if I know, I always, I can't remember who said it, but they said it was shoot, I wish I knew his name. But anyways, he said that if you can help enough people get what they want, right, you'll get what you want. And so when I started to detach from the number, right, oh, I want to make this much a month, and became more about like, I want to help this many people this month, the game shifted, right? And it became more like I started to wake up earlier. I started to wake up happier. I started to wake up like more energized and ready to talk to people, instead of me being like, oh, I want to make 30 grand this month, right? Like, I guess I guess I got to make some cold calls. I guess I got to write a couple more DMs or something like that. But when it became about helping people, that's when it shifted. But that's my level of success. That's how I measure my success, is how many people that I help.
I love that. I love that so much. And I think that's a great place to end this episode because there's so much valuable information today. So before we go, Billy, though, please just tell my audience like what you got going on, where they can find you, where's the best place to connect with you.
Yeah. Yeah. The best place to connect with me is LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time there. Go check out my content, interact with it. That's where you can learn a lot more about me. I share a ton about my own personal money story there, because I think it's important that you see that. And so, if you want to connect there, you can DM me there as well. And we can definitely connect on a deeper level if you want to learn more about my process, how I help people, and all that good stuff. So
Amazing. And I will put the links to all your stuff in the show notes as well, too. All right, guys, thanks for tuning into another episode of the Higher Alignment Podcast. If you got something out of this episode, I would ask that you please go subscribe and leave the podcast a 5-star review so that it can help find its way to other people who are having a hard time and need support. My mission in life is to help executives realize that you don't need to suffer in silence while still performing at a high level. I want to help free people of the heavy pressure they carry on a day-to-day basis, and having more people listen to this podcast will do just that. So wherever you listen to this, please go leave it a 5-star review, hit subscribe so you never miss another episode, and we'll see you in the next one.